Hi, I'm Tina Vercelli, and I'm one of the instructors here at the Goddard Center Art Studios, and today I'm going to show you an abstract watercolor design. First thing you need to do is get a piece of watercolor paper. Now, watercolor paper is different than regular paper. Watercolor paper is thicker because in order for the paint to not wrinkle the paper, it needs to be very, very thick. So make sure that you don't just use regular white paper. Make sure you use some watercolor paper. And you can use any size that you want. Next thing you're going to do is take some masking tape and you're going to make a pattern on your paper. Now, masking tape is usually pretty sticky, so we want to be able to take it off later. So if you just take your tape and stick it on your clothes for just a little bit so it's not quite as sticky. And then you're going to lay it across your paper and make an interesting little pattern. I've got different sizes of tape here to use. It doesn't have to be anything in particular. It can be just a abstract pattern, or if you wanted to, you could even make letters with the tape. That's kind of an interesting pattern, or design rather. You're basically using the tape to section off the page into shapes. You also want to make sure you have a nice little border. Just section it off into 8 to 10 different sections. Whatever looks interesting to you. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I've got an extra one there, but that's okay. All right, once you have it all sectioned off, make sure that your tape is pushed down, because you don't want your watercolor paint to seep underneath the tape. The tape is going to act as a resist. Wherever the tape is, the paint is going to stay away from. So once you get all your tape down, you don't want to press it down too hard because you will be pulling it up later. Alright, I think that looks pretty good. These are watercolor paints. Most schools have them. These are Praying. It's one of my favorites. And the great thing about these type of watercolors is they have a really good color, and then you can also use the lid to mix colors. Now, we always want to use water with watercolors. That's why they're called watercolors. And the water thins down the color where it is what we call transparent. It's a color that you can see through. You can kind of see the paper underneath. Other types of paint, like acrylic or oils, they are what we call opaque. You shouldn't see the paper underneath the paint. So I'm going to paint each one of these sections a different color. First things first is you wet your brush, and you want to do what's called a wet on wet technique. You're going to section it off, and you're going to wet the paper first. Okay. Then you wet your paint. And then you start adding your color onto the paper. Now I want to think about what colors I'm going to use. I don't want to just use every color. I want to kind of plan out my color scheme. So I know reds and oranges and yellows are what we call warm colors, and then blues, purples, and greens are what we call cool colors. Warm colors remind us of heat, cool colors remind us of ice and cold and water. All right? So I want to be thinking about what colors I'm going to use. I'm thinking on this one I might just go ahead and use red and yellow and orange. And then I can also mix those colors on here and get other colors. All right, so let's go over here and mix and paint. Okay. Now, sometimes it's a good idea to wash your brush off before you go into another color so you don't get them all mixed up in the paint tray. So this one, I think I'm going to go, oops, I forgot to wipe my paper. Okay, let's do yellow here. And I'm just using the bristles. I'm not scrubbing the paper with the metal part of the brush. The metal part's called a ferrule. And if you just start scraping, sometimes it'll end up scraping your paper, and you don't really want to do that. Add some color there. Okay. So let's see. I'll move this over here. Let's see what happens if I mix red and yellow together. Let's go right here. Okay, so let's go red, and I'm going to just put it up here in the lid. Okay, and then a little yellow. I get another shade of orange. It's a little different than this one over here. It's got a little bit more red in it. Over here. You want to use lots of water, because if you don't, your watercolors get really sticky on the page, and it just doesn't look right. All right, let's see what happens if I mix red and orange together. Ooh. I get what's called a red orange. Oops, I forgot to put the water on there. See, it spreads out. Paint always goes where the water goes. So if you put the water on the paper, the paint will mix around. Now, another thing you can do when you have wet watercolors. You can take just a piece of plastic wrap. You just buy this at Walmart. I bet there's some in your cabinet at home. And you can lay that across there and just kind of let it sit there and let it dry. And when it dries, you'll end up with an interesting little pattern there. Another thing you can do, oops, I forgot to put my water on there. Another thing you can do is take a little salt. Put it in your hand and then sprinkle it. And as that dries, it makes an interesting pattern. I'm going to throw a little bit right there too. Water there, paint, paint, salt on that. See what happens. You can already see it's starting to dry up here, and you can start seeing little patterns in here. Okay. All right, we're going to let this dry, and then as soon as it dries, we'll go to the next step where we peel off the tape, and then I'll show you what to do in the negative spaces left by the tape. When you start tearing off the masking tape, you'll want to tear it at a 45-degree angle. It helps keep the paper from tearing along with it. Now you end up with an interesting little border there. And now you can go in with a marker . Make some interesting patterns inside those negative spaces left by the tape. See the interesting patterns it's made by the salt, and then the paper, the plastic wrap. Once you've filled in all of the negative space with some interesting patterns, we have a nice little abstract design. I'm Tina Vercelli. Thanks for watching.